Hello, this is for Computer Science 2 homework. I'll just go over the questions very briefly and what I struggled with on these. So for this one is a dice simulation, and basically you have a for loop that runs 36 million times. I have an array called sums, and I want it to not, and I don't want to use index 0, so I set it to 13. And then basically inside the for loop, dice1, dice2 get random values. They get added together, and that is sum. And so whatever the result of sum is, that combination becomes the index of what do you want of the array. And so then you just add one like a tally mark, and then that's basically how it works. I don't really have any problem doing this one. It was fairly simple, and yeah, it was a good question. I'll go over to question number 2 now, and I will play it so we know that it works. So we'll just go like that, and then we'll do the economy so you can see that all the flights get, all the seats get boarded, and then it stops. Anyways, so for this one we have one giant loop, and so basically we have the person input 1 or 2 if they want a first class or a second class, well, not second class, economy seat. And so basically in the loops, we have end, which is just basically the condition that I have for my while loop. So while end equals false, and then if a seat is available and it shows up as false, because that means it's available, then set that seat to true at index I, and then print out a boarding pass, and then just end the loop, right? And so then if you loop and you keep not being able to find a seat, and eventually I equals 5, which is how many first class seats there are, then it will recommend that you want economy. It'll go into a smaller loop, which is a miniaturized version of the other loop over here. And so basically that'll just loop until you find an economy seat. If there's nothing else, if it can't find an economy seat, then it will print out your next flight is in 3 hours. Down here is basically the same exact thing, but if input equals 2, which is if you choose economy for the first time that it asks you, then it goes over the same thing. And then inside here, if you choose that when they recommend that economy is full, if you want first class, then it'll go into a loop that'll search for our first class seat. If it doesn't find it, and then the last part about this one is right here, which is how do you close the main loop, right? And so basically, if all the seats are full, I automatically assume that the seats are full, but if it proves it wrong, which is right here, it will go through the loop, and it'll set full to false, and then it'll break the loop, and then this if statement will never occur, which is just ending the loop. So next homework is very similar. It is basically the same thing, but with using a 2D array. And so I don't need to go over most of the logic in here, but I will go over the parts that are different. So for example, right here, so for first class, right, there's seats and there's rows. And so based on the image that she gave me, there are 4 rows of 3 seats in first class, and then the rest of the seats are economy. That being said, so in one row, if the seat count when it's looping, if the seat counts go to 3 or go or more than 3, then basically set it back to 1 and then change the row to the next row. So that way when it loops, it'll search the next row and it just does it automatically to give you the first available seat. If it doesn't find anything in all the rows, then it'll do the other class where it has a loop that searches. That's like the main important thing. And then for how do you tell if the entire thing is true, I use the same assumption. However, this time you use a nested for loop to sift through the rows and the columns per se. And then if all the seats are full, then it ends the loop, the main loop. Next one. I will say I'll tell you my struggle. This one was the one that I struggled on the most. It was pretty tough figuring out, because I'm not really too experienced with using 2D arrays, but this really did help me like kind of understand and like transitioning the code from the first one, like the same logic or like having the same philosophy behind it, which I think was the hardest. Technically, it wasn't really the hardest thing though. Like, well, it was hard, but you know, it's within my grasp of learning. So, next one is pretty easy. So it's the Fibonacci sequence, and I use array to store the values. I set automatically just off rip set the first Fibonacci in the array and then the second Fibonacci values. And then I use those values to basically count up in this for loop to create, so we'll start at the third index, which is, well, index 2 really. And so basically it creates that index at I will basically loop over, and then it'll be the sum of the one behind it and the one before that. And then that just I keeps on increasing, and that's basically how it works. This one doesn't use a for loop, but it's the same exact thing. Instead, what we use is int variables to basically store the values, and then we just we set the first one to the second and the second to the third, and then when it loops over, then it'll take the first, which was the second, and then the second will be the previous current number, and just keep on adding until whatever you need. It is different in the fact that it has -2, because in this case you do need to, since you set the first two, but it doesn't count them in this for loop. So you have to set the first two and then do -2 so it doesn't go 2 above. I hope I explained that pretty well. No struggles with those. Very, very easy. This one is the first class. What I struggled with was, well, I didn't really struggle with anything, but basically just relearning how to do classes because I haven't done them in a long time. And this is the constructor. And so basically whatever inputs you put in, for example, right here, this correlates to that. Part number is basically this. And so when you create the test, or like that's the name of the class that I made, the object, and then it'll set these values in the order in which you put these in. And then these are all the methods in the class that just return, like, you know, if you want to set the number to something, if you want to just get the number, and you can see that it works here. I'll also play all my code so that way you can see, oh, sorry. Just put a slash in that. You can see all the code works. I know I went a little bit over the time, but I hope. So I'll show you this one too. C changes the row, and then I'll change it to economy. And so it'll just keep on doing seats in each row. And then say 9, 10, and then all seats are booked. Flight leaves in 3 hours. So there we go.